scientifically translated opportunities that are ready for the military. With regard to STORM, we feel that we've got a few different categories for you that look at the capacity to measure, predict, and prescribe. And within these, we certainly note that they are scientifically well-founded. A study here in 2017 that really takes a look at our capacity to measure things in a military-specific manner, to be able to ascribe cognitive tests measuring the tactical warrior's capacity. And we understand that there are some shortcomings with regard to the inability previously to be able to truly take objective measures and conduct those into a military type setting. I'll let Dr. Whittingham talk just a little bit about kind of a three-part overview here, and we'll do that in a moment. I'll give you just some background behind the resilience methodology here. Recent study, as you see here again in 2021, we understand from the evidence that we have the capacity to understand that decision-making capacities are affected by pressure. No surprise there. We now have the ability to objectify that. And with regard to our STORM acronym that we're looking at here, we believe that we can help to understand the best ways to prescribe and also implement a strategy to help those individuals tolerate stress better, decision make under stress better. And we understand from this article that it's a multifactorial consideration that includes physiologic, psychologic, and cognitive pressure strategies that have some gamification capacities for us. I also know that with this more recent finding that we can measure decision-making capacities under pressure, that we can see this physiologically occur in the brain with EEG, and it's not necessary that we take that effort and measure all of your tactical warriors with an EEG or with an fMRI, but we certainly understand that we want to benefit from the science, knowing that certain individuals have different capacities, and we suggest that these might have some trainability, but we do know that they're measurable. So a brief overview here then, the combination of what does SMARTfit bring to the science, and then translate into efforts that are complementary to the military objectives. And I think you see the 5 really specific and unique capacities that SMARTfit has here. We know that we can test persons and objectify their physical capacities. And we know that we can do that in a cognitive manner. And we additionally know that we can dual task that, and I'll describe that a little bit more in just a few moments, looking at the combination of the equation. That's specific to how we test individuals. Then we can intervene and conduct a programming that is person-specific. We also know that utilizing numerics and scores, levels, points, and values, that we can gamify these athletes' capacity to be able to compete against themselves, well-established standards, and other colleagues within a battalion. The person-specific program, we also can prescribe under a military-specific stress conditions, and you see those here. And obviously, that's not meant to be a comprehensive list, but we know the external context-specific stressors are something that have to be considered. So bringing SMARTfit out into the field and into your training operatives certainly would be important. And we also know finally that SMARTfit has the capacity to be very nimble and to evolve as the world changes. We know that, truly the different types of military tactics, strategies, the weaponry that you use, and really the athlete themselves, these matters continue to evolve, and we're confident that SMARTfit has that unique capacity to evolve along with you.
Backing up a little bit, I'm going to have Mike do this slide, but backing up, there's really kind of 3 things we're trying to do in this presentation. One, we're bringing something new to this presentation that we didn't have science to support previously. And that's that 2021 study that Mike alluded to, where they had stressed soldiers through sleep deprivation and caloric restriction. And we saw some physiological measures of that. What was interesting about that study was that the individuals that scored high on resiliency, they did not have a degradation in performance under those stressful conditions. And one of the things that we could do with SMARTfit moving forward, and this is something we have never shared, we have never kind of introduced, but we think it is possible here, is to actually measure the cost of that sort of stress on the soldier using our standardized activities. We can do this in addition to the dual tasking we talked about previously. And there had been a body of literature showing that when soldiers dual task, when they're doing a cognitive activity while simultaneously doing a physical activity, there's degradation in one or both of those other activities. And we've known this for a long time. And so, what we're proposing here, is, we could measure the cost of both the dual tasking and the stress. And that's kind of big picture of what we were trying to do. So, Mike, you want to run through the movement in the background slides?
Absolutely. So this should be a representative graphic that helps us understand truly why we want to have the tactical warrior's capacity to move efficiently at their top running speed, at their ability to be able to fire their weaponry accurately. We want all of the movements that are integral to their survival and those around them to be accurate. And so we want to ensure that all of that movement can occur in the background. By doing some loading and overloading of their capacities within the resource that's finite of attention, we can take the athlete, train them to be proficient in their movement, then also train them to be continually proficient in their movement with the overload of a distraction. And therefore, we're actually helping the attention center, that is a finite resource, to be able to more efficiently operate the ability to sense the environment, to determine what's going on in the outside world, decision make, and not need to actually borrow the finite attention of resource toward movement. So truly, it is overload training that improves the resource of the attention center. You see demarcated here as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and therefore we leave the procedural memory centers, the movement centers for motor memories, alone, and not requiring additional supplementation from the attention centers. Consistent with Dr. Winningham's discussion there about stress being a different type of distraction or load than cognitive decision-making and environmental analysis, we see here in this figure that really the stress system, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands, HPA axis, we see that these are really subject to an individual's capacity to be able to tolerate stress, and also can be what we know as habituated over time. So that is to say, with exposure to the need to make decision make under stressful conditions, that this HPA axis that elevates cortisol and interferes with decision making can be downregulated and improved. Back over to Dr. Winningham here.
And that's a good transition, and I've listened to Mike for over 20 years talk about automatizing behavior, automatizing physical behavior. I mean, this is just, classic movement science now. If we can do that, if we can automatize the physical activity, so we're pushing it down into the cerebellum and some other structures of the brain that don't require much cognitive or any cognitive control at that point, then the soldier can engage more efficiently in the cognitive operations. And where a lot of this research, particularly relative to the military, but frankly, a lot of different populations, from children, brain injury, even older adults, it's all about executive functioning. And we've seen this in the literature for the soldiers as well. And, as I'm sure executive functioning includes attention, cognitive inhibition, controlling distractibility, and that might have some overlap with controlling stress, because these are some similar structures in the frontal lobe. If you can, turn off those stressful ideas, turn off those nagging thoughts that are going to impact your ability to do other executive functioning activities, that's huge. Also, behavioral inhibition, you need to not do something. You might want to engage in a behavior, but you're going to inhibit that. Problem solving, reasoning, planning, and even our working memory, how much we can hold at any given time, will be affected. And you can see there was a quote that pulled out in 2016 studies looking at the military, and they found that soldiers' executive functioning is central to all aspects of their performance, from how a stressor is perceived, physiologically processed, and ultimately managed through behavior. So that's really what we're talking about. And there's a lot of things to manage here. If you think in a high stress situation, you could potentially have many of these distractions coming in, and these are all going to require some of that cognitive load. So we can more effectively manage these, deals with these, or in some cases, inhibit them if we've automatized the behavior, or as Mike says, put the movement in the background.
Very good. So we do understand that attending to the environment is critical, and in this context of a tactical warrior is life or death for themselves and those members in their battalion. And what we're clearly saying here is, as Dr. Winningham suggested, if the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, and a few other centers that are supposed to remember your movement have been trained to do their own responsibilities, to perform their jobs, then that movement can be relied upon no matter the level of distractor or level of pressure, because that movement is stored into the background and safely reposited into areas that are not reliant upon attention. So we want to be able to determine the measurable fraction of loss with individuals, and we call that dual task cost. So the capacity for your movement to be stored in the background is a metric that we can capture and lead into this notion that you see represented here graphically of dual task cost. What you're looking at here is a tablet or iPhone application of the SMARTfit itself. We can operationalize a physical only task, measure the capacity, number of touches, speed, power, performance, etc. Then we can operationalize a cognitive-only task. Perhaps that's going to be remembering a certain set of instructions, a digit span, a phone number, coordinates, etc. Then we can see how well the athlete can do both of those together. And only truly through measuring both of those can we see which, either or both of those, has endured any losses, which is the graphic you see down at the bottom. Have they lost anything? There's a 0% physical loss. There's a 27% loss in cognitive scoring in the dual task as compared to the single task. Let's take a moment to see what that looks like now. One of many iterations of what we can do. In this one, you'll see the athlete creating a physical and cognitive together. So you're only seeing the end stage, where he's challenged to be able to recall where he is in the sequence of counting backwards by threes. And he's doing that in a burpee type position, being the physical attribute. A picture says 1,000 words. So you'll notice he's going to go down to the floor, tap the next one. He'll come up. He's got to tap 3. And he's going to count upward by 3. He'll find a 6 down there, looking for a 9 up here, looking for a 12. Finds it, looking for a 15, finds it. You get the picture from there. Again, we can combine this in manners that include shuttle runs, obstacle courses, and many other iterations that may feel and look and represent much more tactical specific capacities. So on this one, we certainly understand that we can uniquely position ourselves to measure and train the unique challenges of the warfighter, tactical warrior, etc. And again, just briefly, and I believe that this is very self-evident for you, Colonel Najera, you can understand the critical capacities of your physical. Can I run at top speed? Can I decision make? Can I do that, both of those accurately under high pressure situations? also under low nutrition, low hydration, fatigue, environmental constraints, etc.? Can I tolerate a distraction that is of ultimate importance? Can I prioritize and move from everything that I was doing to a communication that I'm now receiving? And then can I recall where I was and shift back in? And we talk about task interruption, multitasking, prioritization, and switching. And can we do all of that? And again, being considerate with what Dr. Winningham talked about, inhibiting activities, behaviors, choices that we know are perhaps not our best choices, but our frontal lobe tempts us into.
Probably worth bringing up the difference between multitasking and dual tasking in this context. So a lot of people can think those are synonymous, but they're not. Dual tasking is, as I said, doing a physical and a cognitive. Multitasking, which we often have to do a lot in life, is doing two cognitive tasks. So you're doing one, you need to stop it, do something else, and then come back to that. And so we have already built interventions within SMARTfit that does just that, and so that we can really target that. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things that's really important, and we should be asking ourselves, will this training that we can do on the SMARTfit, will it generalize to the real world? Will that training transfer to the real world? And the good news is, if you improve executive functioning, then that does tend to generalize really well. And it makes sense, right? I mean, if you have better attention, better inhibition abilities, that does generalize to new contexts. And we've seen that in research for the past 20 years. So that's going to be important. We want our resiliency in difficult emotional situations and our ability to inhibit that to generalize. If you improve your inhibition, it's going to. Unfortunately, the opposite also happens, and this is another use of SMARTfit. If you have a frontal lobe injury, it is very common to see those individuals lose the ability to inhibit, lose the ability to pay attention. And so from a rehabilitation standpoint, and this is where Mike uses SMARTfit a lot already in his clinics, is that we can try to help rehabilitate somebody to improve those abilities who have had an injury or some reason to go down. We know that dual tasking leads to more efficient frontal lobe activity. And this is, this research is now 7 years old. But we see when we train people in a dual tasking environment, and that's a big part about SMARTfit. We've talked a lot about testing, which will allow us to predict and measure improvement. But we have the ability to do some intensive training, and we've developed a whole catalog of interventions. And the research shows that actually leads to more efficient frontal lobe activity, which is exciting. Next slide. Going back to some, and I think we mentioned this in the call that we had previously, one of the best studies at that point was from 2018, looking at pilot errors. And they found that the pilot errors typically resulted from interruptions and distractions. And it's not surprising. We all see this in our daily life. You're doing something, you're interrupted, and your ability to come back to that is impaired. And if you look at the multitasking research, that's a lot of what they focus on. And it turns out people can get better at that type of multitasking, where they do one cognitive activity, go to another, and come back. And that's what we can train and measure in SMARTfit. In this study, they also just pointed to what we've been talking about, that military personnel, they need to problem solve. They need to perform in uncertain and stressful environments, and they need to switch between tasks, all while giving sustained attention. And that's what we can measure and train.
So this is bringing it back a little bit more military specific. I've already alluded to this. If we start in the upper left-hand corner, we see that an individual's capacity to be able to sprint across an environment, if they were only needing to focus on that, we'd have something that's similar to an NFL combine. But imagine having the tactical warrior sprint at full speed, also have to recognize the location and identify where the sound of an explosion came from. That would be considered to be a task interruption. Is there any task cost to that? Is there some switching while the individual is prioritizing the direction of their running and perhaps changing that in a function or as a function of where the explosion was? Are they able to resume sprinting again? And this is really kind of a simplified cycle of what we'd like to be able to capture for you and program accordingly. We certainly recognize that we want to engage the athletes so that when we're programming for them, that they see it as meaningful. They also see themselves as gainful. And we understand that the capacity to make gains is partially dependent on attention, partially dependent on intensity. And what gets that more than an individual who's competing against themselves, other people that are like them around them, or standardized normative data? And that's where we come into gamification. Truly ascribing a baseline, here's where you are in this, can you get better, and allowing the athlete to compete. Now, we certainly can improve better and more proficiently when we know that we are improving and where we've come from. As we begin to wrap up, we understand the importance of being able to improve certainly our most important athlete in the nation. And we want to be able to make certain that those athletes see that we're taking this seriously as well. We give them a personalized, prescribed baseline of where they are today, the capacity to improve on that and remeasure, and certainly that can be engaging to them. We can do that in a rehabilitative manner. You've sustained a recent concussion. Can you get back to baseline? We can do that in a manner that helps them also know that they are physically and cognitively and psychologically fit on a regular basis. I want to check myself. I want to make sure that I'm doing okay. We understand in all of these considerations together, we want to personalize the experience for the athlete. And I have to ask you, Colonel Najera, if you really can answer the question at the bottom of the slide that I've posed to you, quite rhetorical in nature. Do you truly know any tactical athletes that are not competitive against themselves or others? And I suggest that would be very rare. And so we want to leverage that capacity. Just have our references to close for you here so that you can see the science behind some of what we're talking about. Certainly, this could be nearly infinite, but I'll close the presentation at that point for our discussion.